This video today is going to be all about the master narrative. We'll cover what is the master narrative, what is the master narrative in the United States, and how do we challenge it. The EQ, or essential question for this video, will be, what is the master narrative and why must we challenge it? You've probably heard the word master before, so let's start here. Like master, as in master key. That's a main key, a key that opens more than just one lock. It opens multiple, like maybe even all the locks at your school. Or you've heard about a master storyteller? This might be a main storyteller, someone who is so good at telling stories, or who knows so much about those stories that people really want to listen to what they have to say. Your home might even have a master bathroom. This is like the main bathroom of the house, usually the largest, the nicest. It's the restroom reserved for the owners of the home. So if we know all of that, then we sort of know what master means in the context of master narrative. You see, the word master is an adjective. It means words like main, principal, leading, foremost, or my favorite, dominant. So if we know what a master would mean, then what is narrative? You probably know a lot of words related to this one, like a narrator. This word is a noun, and it means a person who tells a story, gives information, or explains. The narrators are the talkers. And the word narrate is kind of similar, but this is a verb, an action word. See, to narrate means to speak, to say, or to tell, but it's deeper than that. You would say something simple like, I am thirsty, but you would narrate something deeper, like the story of crossing a vast, dry desert and having a deep, relentless thirst at the end of your journey. So our word narrative is deeper too, just like that. It's a noun, and it means things like account, tale, description, record, or my favorite, story. So when we use the phrase master narrative, what we're actually talking about is a dominant story. But then I wonder, what is the master narrative, or what is the dominant story? The master narrative is a story or account of events. It is also widely believed by lots of people. It is agreed upon by lots of people. It is woven into the life, community, and culture of all those people who believe in it and agree upon it. And it is often told from the dominant viewpoint. There we get that word dominant again. If it's dominant, then that means it might overlook some others, people who are not dominant. In his text from 1994, titled A Different Mirror for Young People, A History of Multicultural America, author Ronald Takaki writes, the master narrative says that our country was settled by European immigrants, and that Americans are white. People of other races, people not of European ancestry, have been pulled to the sidelines of the master narrative. Sometimes they are ignored completely. Sometimes they are merely treated as the other, indifferent and inferior. Either way, they are not seen as part of America's national identity. So here's everything we know about the master narrative so far. It is a dominant story here in America about our American history. It tells us that Americans came primarily from European ancestry. And that means people of other races are left on the sidelines, they are left out, or they are often ignored. But does this mean that the master narrative is the truth? Does it have to stick? Like, are we stuck with it forever? Does it have to be believed? The answer is no. There are parts of this narrative that are true, sure, and parts that we can definitely believe. But there is way more to this story. In his 2006 commencement speech at Whitman College, that same author, Ronald Takaki, pictured here, said, We can just look at ourselves here today, our students, families, and faculty, and know that not all of us came from just one shore. And even though many of us do not look like Europeans and do not have European sounding names, we are all Americans. We all came here originally from around the world. Here we made America, and in the process, remade ourselves into Americans. So what should we do about this master narrative, this tells the story but not all of it kind of story? We should argue it. We should change it. We should fight against it. And we should challenge it. But how can you do that? Yes, you, as one person, one reader of history and one learner of history, how can you challenge this dominant story, this master narrative? You do this with something called the counter narrative. You've probably heard counter used like this before as a prefix for things like counterclockwise. So what does this mean? Well, we already know that a narrative is a story. So let's focus on the counter part. That means in the other direction, opposite, or against. And this last one, this working against or in opposition to something, is where we'll land today. In the International Encyclopedia of Education, authors Jen K. Bergen and Verna St. Denis tell us that counter-narratives are stories that detail the experiences and perspectives of those who are historically oppressed, excluded, or silenced in educational settings. Let's review the counter-narrative one more time so we know how it plays into the master narrative. Remember that the master narrative is the dominant story of American history. It is that story that Americans came from European ancestry. And remember that those people of other races were on the sidelines, left out, or ignored. And that's where the counter-narrative comes in. This last part is where the counter-narrative gives some long overdue attention to those other voices. The forgotten ones, the marginalized ones, the ones who should no longer be ignored. Our counter-narrative steps in here. It is a story told from a different perspective. It tells the story from a viewpoint that is not the dominant viewpoint. It is stories that have been ignored. And how, you might be asking, does the counter-narrative prepare for battle against the big and sometimes bad master narrative? The counter-narrative will encourage you to ask questions, to seek different perspectives, to read multiple accounts, and to explore different viewpoints. You'll also have to evaluate your sources to make sure the words that you are reading can be trusted. But now remember, when faced with the master narrative tells us the story of what is. The counter-narrative, on the other hand, tells us the story of not. That would be, what is not included? Who is overlooked or ignored? Why are some voices treated as less important than others? So now what? We know about the master narrative, that dominant story of dominant voices, and we know about the counter-narrative, which we can use to challenge it. So what's next? That part, my friend, is up to you. Use what you learned and what you know to keep asking questions. Keep challenging the master narrative. Keep searching for the truth that you build through listening to as many trusted sources and as many varied voices as you can. Happy learning!